Welcome back to the HRE 4M audio file series. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 8. So this is again part of Unit 3. Okay, so in keeping with what's going on in Unit 3, just a quick recap. We've now taken the ideas of ethics and morals, looked at them in a kind of a general sense. And then in Unit 2, we've kind of taken those ideas and expounded on them in reference to uh, Christian Catholic perspectives and how that ties together. And in this unit, we're now going to push that thinking about ethics and morality and the good and try to drill down into, in this unit and in the next, how that kind of takes shape in the real world, if you will, how it kind of takes shape in our own lives that we live day by day. So in Chapter 8, the chapter kind of begins with this introduction to norms, rules, obligations, um, and it breaks down what norms are, which moral norms are criteria of judgment about the sort of persons we ought to be and the sorts of actions we ought to perform. So you've got norms need to be reasonable, are declared by an authority, involve our freedom, um, direct our inclinations and desires. All of that points to the fact that we recognize that um, there are moral norms that govern our behavior, and that authority can be either civil, it could be religious, it can be a combination of the two. It could be our own authority that drives those norms as well. Um, when we look at this idea of norms, it goes hand in hand with understanding obligation. You're kind of obliged to adhere to those norms um, because they fall within those other factors for us. So that, they're reasonable, they appeal to our reason and our freedom, etc. There's that obligation to adhere to those, which then kind of moves us into this idea of laws. Um, the law is the highest expression of a norm for action. Law is commonly understood as a guide or a directive for human action. In other words, when you look at the laws that we live with in the world that we live in the society that we live in, those by virtue tend to be extensions of our norms, our moral norms. So laws uh, need lawmakers. Uh, there's a specific directive within the law. They adhere to the common good. Um, they work for a specific group of people within an institutional framework, and there's an obligation. Again, we go back to this obligation. You're going to see us come back to that all the time, that you're kind of obliged to follow laws. Okay. Um, so when we look at this idea of a lawmaker, we're looking at either God from a religious standpoint or human law, so some kind of civil authority. Okay, the idea of a specific directive of the common good, that should be relatively self-explanatory based on what those little headings are. When we talk about a specific group of people, um, laws are in place to protect specific groups in scenarios. And some of that specific group may be all of humanity. Then it may specify certain segments of society. All right. From that, we then get into this idea of rules. Um, Rules aren't strictly or necessarily legislated, but there's obligation or obligatory guidelines for action. So, your direct experience of rules is, uh, whether you're online classes or you're in school, it's being there on time for attendance, the uniform, those are rules. Okay, and that should, kind of give you you know, an understanding of that. What that does for us when we talk about rules, norms, laws, obligations, um, it then moves us into this idea of when we look at um, ethics and morality, we start to see how um, Aquinas has said that the first principle of natural law: do good and avoid evil. Um, and then he extends that by saying that our inclination to preserve and protect life, to procreate and educate, our tendency toward truth, and our inclination to cooperate with one another all derive from natural law. Those are norms that, to one degree or another, we've adhere to, and with that, um, it ties back into that good and happy life by being able to adhere. So now you're starting to see layers within these unit with chapters within this unit build on one another. The idea that we start to look at how we can gain traction with these understandings of this earlier material and have it come to fruition or take root in our daily lives. After that, the chapter gets into two kind of case studies. One's assisted human reproduction, and then the next one's euthanasia and assisted suicide. Um, I'm not going to go through. You can read those little scenarios in the text. The overarching idea or theme from these two ideas is, where assisted human reproduction falls into that area of um, natural law, moral norms. Okay, and then same thing with euthanasia and assisted suicide. How that so life and death, those two kind of spectrums, whether we should attempt to control those or regulate those in one way or another. From that, we move into this, and it's a little interesting kind of scenario at the end of the chapter, is this story about Gaiji's ring. And the idea is, if you were given a ring that could make you invisible, what would you do? Um, most most people on the surface, when you think of that story, you're gonna be like, well, I don't know if I'd act very differently. The idea is, it's how well instilled your norms are for yourself, the obligations you feel to those norms, how you would adhere to laws and rules if certain restrictions were taken away from you. In this case, nobody could see you. You were completely invisible. You'd never be seen. What, in essence, would you actually do or not do? And it's not a question of people listing a number of positive things or negative things or questionable things. It's this kind of philosophical exercise in the sense that some people have a tendency to then try to get away with things because they know they won't get caught. Um, that then really, the discussion really needs to come back to, not that, oh, they can get away with it and not get caught, so okay, or it's, that's unfortunate. It's about that understanding of how well imbued in oneself your moral norms are, your moral rules, your moral laws that you'll adhere to, those ethical standards that you'll adhere to or won't adhere to, no matter what the situation is. And that is really what this chapter is trying to drive at. If you can center yourself around the fact that these are lines you're never going to cross, then you're more apt to be well grounded in having a good and happy life, because you're much more self-aware. You're much more able to exercise that chastity, that self-mastery, irregardless of how things flex or change over time, or even how the parameters will flex and change over time, or the fact that uh, in this case, the ring gives you an ability that allows you to kind of circumvent certain things. And that really, it's a short little section of the text, but it's very powerful in the sense that it opens up the door to, a lot of conversations that you should be having with yourselves about, what you're capable of doing, what you can do, could do, should do, would do, um, and what that means for you as an individual, both ethically and morally. This one I know seems like a little shorter version, only because it's relatively straightforward material. there's some things to get into in there, but really that's, up to you to kind of break that down further. But ask me again questions if you've got them, you're not sure about anything. Um, and I think, yeah, that's pretty much it for chapter 8. So as usual, if you've got any questions or concerns, you know, let me know. We can discuss them. And until next time, have a great day.